So we're coming up to our first presentation session, and just before I forget, the session is sponsored by Van Hoot Coffee. So everybody give a round of hand. And the presentation is going to be Pat Byrne of Fatigue Science. And Pat, how many people here are hockey fans? Okay, and you can confess this in this group. How many people here are Canucks fans? We can get treatment for you. But the reason I bring that up is Pat is actually the sleep doctor for the Canucks. I'm not sure whether he gets them to wake up when they play or puts them to bed after they finish losing. But anyhow, it's enough of slamming the Canucks. He's the sleep doctor for the Canucks. I thought that would be an interesting lead-in for you. He has got a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Chemistry, a Master of Science from Western Washington University, and is a certified industrial hygienist. Pat spent a number of years working as a health and safety professional in a variety of settings, including WorkSafe BC. He said, what, 20, a long time? Okay, 20, WorkSafe BC. Pat had a sort of a life-altering incident. Actually, it wasn't him. His nephew was in a motor vehicle accident. His nephew had been working shift work, had gotten overly fatigued, fell asleep at the wheel, and died in a motor vehicle accident. This changed the focus of Pat's career. He realized that there was very little work being done on the occupational effects of sleep deprivation, and he started researching that and taking it upon himself as an area of professional focus and professional interest. Currently, he's one of the leading occupational sleep specialists in the world. He is founder of Fatigue Science and the inventor of the Ready Band, and he's now going to talk to you about not sleep on the job, but how sleeping can affect you on the job.
Thanks, Scott. Can you hear me with this microphone on I have here? Okay, good. I tend to talk a little bit loud. It's great to be back in this part of the world, and I really wanted to thank the Trucking Safety Council for inviting me here today. I like to get out of the office and out of airports. I was actually born quite close to here. I was born in my birth certificate says Murrayville, but I'm not sure it still exists anymore. It was in Langley. I grew up as a little kid in Fort Nelson, and I didn't really like the trucking industry there because at that time the Alaska Highway was dirt, and every time a truck went by, our house got covered with dust. And it's probably changed a little bit. I haven't been back since then. My family moved back to Langley, and I went to Langley High School, graduated from there, went to university in Washington State. And then came back to British Columbia and started working for WorkSafe BC. I was there for 21 years. Left 12 years ago went into private practice on occupational health and safety and got involved on the fatigue side. Been very, very fortunate to be able to partner with some major organizations, the largest insurance company in the world, Munich Reinsurance. They insure 5,000 different companies, different insurance companies. We've partnered with them. We partner with organizations like Rio Tinto, the U.S. military, and we've learned a lot about how people function, how people operate, how fatigue affects the workplace, how it affects their health. And we're going to go through some of that. And one of the things I've noticed, certainly in my life, in my evolution, was when I was in high school, most cars didn't even have seat belts. And that's evolved to where I feel completely uncomfortable, and my kids feel completely uncomfortable in a car without a seatbelt on. We still have people that drive around without them. I see it all the time. But our society has evolved, and it takes a long time to kind of evolve those things. When I was going to university in Washington State, it was legal to drink beer while you're driving your car. You couldn't be over 0.08, but it was perfectly legal to drink beer. I got pulled over once because my taillight was out, and I'm sitting there with a 6-pack of beer in my car. It was acceptable. Our society has changed. It doesn't change overnight, it evolves. And now it's completely, in our society, completely unacceptable to drink and drive. We know the consequences of that. When I first joined WorkSafe BC, their office wasn't in Richmond, their office was on Heather Street in Vancouver. People were smoking at their desks. Now, if somebody lights up a cigarette, everybody's head turns. Our society has evolved. We understand the risks, and it wasn't easy. You know, that's a 10 or 15-year journey to change our Western society views of those sorts of things. What I've really discovered globally is that fatigue is moving in that direction. We do a lot of work in Australia, particularly in the mining industry and in the military and the sports teams. They're probably 10 to 15 years ahead of where we are, but their fatigue is part of fitness for duty, and it's completely unacceptable to work with people that are fatigued. The guys just won't do it. So we're working on that journey globally, and I want to say that fatigue is not a trucking issue. Fatigue is a human issue. And it doesn't matter what uniform you put on or what clothes you put on in the morning. If you're fatigued, it's going to affect your life and it's going to affect your health. And if you're a Canuck and you're tired, you're not going to play very well. I can tell you that. So I'm going to look for this. A couple of years ago, Dr. Sanjay Gupta on CNN did a wonderful program on sleep and fatigue. And I took about 5 minutes out of that, because then he covers off so many points and I don't have to go through some of that. So I'm going to see if I can make this work. No. Uh-oh. Like this way? No. Oh, I see. Here we go. See if I... So I just press the... What do I do? I can make a watch, but I can't make this thing work. Okay. Can we turn up the sound a bit?
We now return to sleep.
No, we need some sound volume.
Sanjay Gupta.
Lots of volume.
We live in a world where day and night no longer matter. We can work, play, eat, pretty much do anything we want around the clock. What we don't do enough of is sleep.
I would say that I average about 6 hours of sleep.
About 4 to 6 hours, maybe.
Probably get 4 or 5 hours. 4 or 5 hours.
I'm tired every day. Every night I'm tired.
As a society, we are chronically sleep deprived, researchers say. Most of us need 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep, but we're only getting an average of about 6.5 during the week, a little more on weekends. This shortfall doesn't go away. In fact, it builds. Researchers call this our sleep debt.
Day after day, living on reduced amounts of sleep, you become more and more impaired, more dependent on caffeine, have more difficulty concentrating, at greater risk for falling asleep, more difficulty remembering, but you think you're doing fine. The facility is set up to control those factors that typically influence sleep-wake behavior.
Chronobiology lab at the University of Pennsylvania.
Sensors.
His lab deprives healthy people of sleep to see how they do.
The baby cried and upset her
Mother.
He could not believe his son stole a
Quarter.
Red, green, red.
Stay up for 24 hours like this test subject, and you're likely to perform as well as someone who's had a couple of drinks. Here's something else. Experiments show the majority of people sleeping 6 hours a night for a week will result in mental lapses and sleepiness, as severe as if he'd stayed up all night long. Long-term, lack of sleep can have serious consequences on our health.
The less you sleep, the more likely you are to die of all causes, or to have a heart attack or a stroke, or to have diabetes, or to have weight gain.
My name is Tom Callaghy. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Pennsylvania.
You don't have to wait years for fatigue to take a tragic toll. It can happen in the blink of an eye.
My wife and I were coming back from a dog agility show in Virginia, and we actually left in the middle of Sunday afternoon, and it was a gray, sort of overcast day. It had been drizzly, that I was getting sleepy. I turned on the radio, opened the window a little bit, I moved around, and I actually had my hand partway across the seat to wake her up. And the next thing I knew, I'd gone off the road and into the trees.
Tom Callaghy's wife, Janie, died in that crash. Callaghy talks about the accident to warn others about the dangers of drowsy driving.
My kids had a mother one day and something out the next. I mean, Kathleen said, my daughter, said that Mom went away for the weekend, just never came home.
In a first-of-its-kind study, the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute wired up 100 cars for a year to capture driver behavior. The cars got into 82 accidents during that time, and researchers say fatigue contributed to 10 of them. Here, we see a driver in the study nodding off for a moment and almost running off the road. According to federal estimates, drowsy driving causes 100,000 crashes a year in the United States, resulting in 1,500 deaths and 71,000 injuries. Dr. Charles Seisler is chief of the Division of Sleep Medicine at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston.
Every second in this country, somebody is nodding off or falling asleep at the wheel. And every 2 minutes, that's 30 times an hour, there is a fall asleep crash on our nation's highways associated with people who haven't gotten enough sleep at night.
If you are nodding off, experts agree. Pull over immediately. If possible, find a place to stay. If not, drink a cup of coffee and take a half-hour nap. When you wake up, the caffeine will have taken effect. Still, give yourself another half hour before you start driving again. The latest research shows that grogginess right after you wake up can also be dangerous. Fatigue can have catastrophic results in many areas, not just driving.
Engines getting throttling down now.
The commission investigating the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger disaster said overworked and sleep-deprived managers at Kennedy Space Center ignored known risks and allowed the launch to take place.
Challenger, go and throttle up.
When the Exxon Valdez ran aground in 1989, the third mate was at the helm. He had slept only 6 hours in the previous 48. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, fatigue contributed to this 1999 American Airlines crash in Little Rock, Arkansas. The captain had been on duty more than 13 hours when he tried to land in a thunderstorm shortly before midnight. He and 10 passengers died. 134 passengers were injured. And the NTSB says fatigue played a role in the 1997 crash of Korean Air Flight 801 into a hillside in Guam. The cockpit voice recorder picked up the Korean pilot uttering the words "Jungmo Ro, Jolri Su," really sleepy, as he made his final approach. 228 people died.
For a long time we thought, well, you know, if you have the right stuff, if we train you enough, if we give you the best equipment, then you won't have fatigue-related problems. But now we know that that's just simply not the case.
John Caldwell is the lead researcher for the Air Force Fatigue Countermeasures Program.
The NTSB had a report basically saying that there were more commercial accidents and crews that had been awake longer than in those that had not.
Your reaction time is slower. Your attention span becomes shorter, your memory is somewhat impaired, and so all of those are bad things when you're having to rapidly assimilate. You've got a lot of people's lives at stake depending on the accuracy of your performance.
Shortly after this was aired, John Caldwell left the U.S. Air Force and came to join my company. And he had worked for us for 2.5 years and helped us develop many of the fatigue risk safety management systems we use today. He's since come back to private practice. I think he's doing one for NASA at the moment. So we've been very fortunate in being able to partner with some really great people globally. There will be a little bit of science. I'll try to make it brief. Fact of the matter is, we are what scientists call diurnal animals. So we are biologically programmed to be awake in the daytime and sleep at night. You can't change that. Raccoons are nocturnal. They're biologically programmed to sleep in the daytime and be awake at night. The problem with us in our society, we live in a 24/7 society, and that's not going to change. You know, when we lived in caves, we didn't have light bulbs. You slept when it's dark out. It's simply not natural to be awake at night. But we force ourselves to do that. And when you do that, you pay a health price for it and you pay a safety price for it. So fatigue management is about trying to manage those risks because you're really pushing people through their natural biology that they wouldn't normally do. I mean, as humans, we can wake up, we can keep ourselves up at night, and we force ourselves to do that. I mean, really, if you think about it as a species, if it went dark and we fell asleep, we'd probably be some carnivore's meal in the middle of the night. You couldn't get up and defend yourself and run away. So we do that, but the problem is we take advantage of that. So there are really, talk a little bit about how we measure sleep and scientifically, and how we measure fatigue scientifically, and how the two correlate. there have been a lot of myths about sleep and fatigue over the years, and a lot of that is driven by some of the early research around sleep deprivation and others. If you look at the literature, a lot of the research is based on self-reported sleep and self-reported fatigue. And I'll show you some great studies done at Washington State and at Walter Reed Army Research Hospital and others that really show that people are pretty poor at judging their own sleep, and even more poor, that's the right word, at judging their own fatigue. So a lot of the early studies about how much sleep people get or how much sleep they need, it can really be thrown in the trash bin. So there are really only two scientific ways to measure sleep. One is called polysomnography. If anybody's been through a sleep study, you know what that is. You go into a hospital bed, they put electrodes all over your body, they measure your brain waves, and that's how sleep is defined. They can tell what stage of sleep you're at, what kind of sleep disorder you have, which is great for a hospital setting, has no practical value in the workplace. What grew up with that technology is a technology called actigraphy. And that was a surrogate way to measure sleep outside the lab. And the ReadyBand that we developed is just another more modern version of actigraphy. That technology has been around for over 30 years. It's recommended, it's over 3,000 published papers using that technology. Most people don't know about it because it's been used by university researchers. What we did in fatigue science was to take the old bulky actigraph technology out of the sleep labs and made it a useful technology in the workplace. And also, so that if you put the ReadyBands or actigraphy on people and then they go through polysomnography, it's 94% accurate. So that's pretty good for the workplace. It's actually a clinical level sleep analysis. It's FDA, our ReadyBand anyways, is the only FDA and Health Canada approved sleep and fatigue analysis system. It's clinical level. In fact, it's covered under U.S. Medicare system. Self-reported sleep, most of the studies show it's 50 to 60% accurate, and it's not that people lie to us about how much sleep they're getting. People are really good at knowing when they get into bed and when they get out of bed. What goes on in between, I don't know. How many times do they wake up? How often do they wake up? What's the quality of their sleep? Stanford University did a study, we published it last year, the year before, where they actually tracked using actigraphy sleep of some of their NCAA basketball and other teams, and found that on average over a 2-year period, most of the players reported 70 more minutes a night sleep than they actually got. So if you ever done polysomnography, this is basically what the sleep stages look like. So when you're awake, drowsy, your various stages of sleep, and flatline if you're dead. Basically, so you don't want to see that, trust me. But what's interesting here is if you look at you can't really see it there, the REM sleep is pulled up here. This actually should be the deep sleep here, and there's one missing. This is actually REM sleep, which looks very, very much like when you're awake. And REM sleep with a rapid eye movement is when you dream, and so it's very close to when you're awake. And as a matter of fact, what happens in your brain when you're going through REM sleep is it actually freezes your body. So when you're dreaming, you can't move. Otherwise, you act out your dreams. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not good. But there's actually a sleep disorder where that's disconnected. And I've seen these on videos where people are thrashing around and literally they've beat up and killed their spouses, right? Because they're acting their dreams out and they're walking around, and it's really quite a dangerous thing. So I just want to give you some flavor of how they measure sleep in the lab. I'm doing this. So in order to get the sort of clinical level sleep, you can look at, I'm a bit confused about where I'm at here. Okay. There's the slide missing here. So one of the things you get when you wear the ReadyBand is going to show you is actually get the hours of sleep and how many times you wake up and how long it takes you to fall asleep, a whole pile of different kind of statistics. What we did was, and I'll show you that technology, was to marry up some technology from the US military. What they did was they spent 12 years and $18 million with obviously captive audience and figured out how people performed under various sleeping conditions. And they created a software program that can predict, based on your sleep patterns, what the change in your reaction time is going to be and what your accident risk is going to be. And so we've been lucky to get our hands on that technology and to marry it in with the Ready Band. I'm going to come back to this in a second. It's just kind of the corporate reports that we can do. So this is the kind of report that you get on the sleep side. So the blue is when you're sleeping, and the dark area is when you're awake. So you can see when you fall asleep, when you wake up, how many times you wake up, and that sort of business. So it's very interesting. People are fascinated to look at their own sleep. It's a great screening tool. We can tell whether you likely have a sleep disorder or not. So that's how you measure sleep. It's actually, as technology evolves, it's become easier and easier. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, my daughters never heard of an iPhone. Now they can't live without it. Technology evolves quickly. And certainly on the sleep and fatigue area, it's evolved very quickly. How we measure fatigue is in the lab, they use what's called a PVT, or what's called a psychomotor vigilance task. It's basically a little Game Boy and a reaction time thing, and it's about a 10-minute test. And so that is the only scientifically valid, objective way to measure fatigue. It's not looking in somebody's eyes, it's not asking them anything, it's not looking at their head bouncing around. When you look at the research around sleep and fatigue, it's about reaction time and ability to concentrate. So I'm going to show you a couple of sleep restriction studies that were done at Washington State and Walter Reed Army Research Hospital. It's a little bit of science, but I'll walk you through it. It's easy. So what they did was they took groups of people for 14 days into a lab, and they restricted their sleep. So they put them through polysomnography. They knew exactly when they were sleeping, when they weren't sleeping. And then they gave them those reaction tests. And so what you see here are people with 8 hours of sleep for 14 days. And what you're seeing is a slight increase in the number of mistakes and the slower reaction time that they make over a 14-day period. Which is interesting because we've always been led to believe that 8 hours of sleep is what you need to get by every day. The truth is, if you actually look at how we perform in an objective testing, it's more like 9 to 10 hours to flatline that. And lots of good studies on the sports side as well to show that. That's what we pushed for the Canucks. When we first started, we were pushing 8 hours of sleep. Now we're pushing 9 and 10 hours of sleep. Trying to create those windows for the players because that can actually max your reaction time out. The second group is people with 6 hours of sleep over 14 days. So you can see they start performing worse and worse and worse as their sleep debt increases. And people with 4 hours of sleep perform pretty poorly on a regular basis. These are the kind of people that have sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, other kinds of medical issues or lifestyle issues. You're making huge numbers of mistakes with 4 hours of sleep every night. What's fascinating about this study was when they take that PVT test or reaction test, are black boxes. So they don't know what their scores are. They ask them to self-rate their fatigue. And this is what they self-rate. So the 8-hour people said, you know what? Having 8 hours sleep is perfectly fine. I think I'm perfectly good. People with 6 hours and with 4 hours of sleep, only the first 2 nights did they report being fatigued. And after that, they said, you know what? I feel the same as I did yesterday. This is what's absolutely scary about fatigue, is they're not lying. This is a phenomenon called renorming. So how you feel today is based on how you felt maybe yesterday or the day before, but not last week. So humans get used to low hours of sleep, and that starts to feel normal to them, but they can't function on objective testing anywhere near they could with 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And you hear this all the time. I've had this argument with not just Canuck players, but a lot of the sports teams who are global. I feel fine. What they do is they confuse how they feel with how they can perform. So this is what's called the safety model. So this is what the US military decided to build. And what they said was, this is the biological model of how sleep affects our performance. And as I said, they spent 12 years and $18 million creating mathematical formulas around this program, trying to predict if we knew precisely when people were sleeping, how would they perform? You know, this is not going to be in a test book. So here we have another sleep restriction study done at Walter Reed Army Research Hospital. And it's a little confusing because it's flipped upside down from the other one, but I'll walk you through it quickly. So this is done for 7 days. So they took these 4 groups of people and they put them in a lab for 3 nights and gave them 9 hours of sleep. And that's all of their PVT reaction time scores. Then they took one group and sleep restricted them for 3 hours a night for a week. And you can see how rapidly their sleep drops off. And the same with 5 hours, 7 hours, and 9 hours. What's fascinating about this research is a couple of things. The human variability around human performance with 9 hours is much smaller than it is with reduced sleep. So, and I'm going to come to this a little bit later, part of the sort of overall, the old myths about sleep is how much sleep do you need? The real answer is not how much sleep do you need. The answer is how well do you want to perform? As I said, the studies done at Stanford last year around with their basketball program, they said you can max out, these numbers are even smaller, and you can max it out at 10 hours. What's also fascinating about this is if you look at the recovery phase. So after a week of being sleep deprived, they give each of these groups 9 hours of sleep. And you can see after 9 hours of sleep, except for the 9-hour group, nobody fully recovers. And we can tell now from the software that if you're awake for 24 hours, it's going to take you 5 nights of 9 hours of sleep to catch up that sleep debt. And this is one of the, quite frankly, using this software technologies is how we work with the Canucks and help them work on the whole recovery part of travel and how we change some of their travel issues. For example, I mean, they're at the mercy of certain things as you guys are. For example, in the NHL, you cannot travel the day of a game. So if you have a back-to-back game, you got a game in New York and a game in Florida, you have to go after your game in New York, hop on a plane and fly to Florida that night. So there are certain rules you have to follow. And so, particularly in back-to-back games, you can't do anything about that. That's the NHL rule. So what you want to do is work backwards in the schedule to make sure that the players, before they get into their first game of a back-to-back game, have no sleep debt. So a lot of the juggling that we've done with them over the years hasn't to do with the exact game, but often sometimes 2 and 3 or 4 games back, where we'll have them stay over in Minnesota trying to catch up on their sleep debt before they head into back-to-back games, those kinds of things. So this technology has been used, I think, pretty successfully by that organization and others as well. But what I want to show you here is that software program that we have attached to the ReadyBand, how when they looked at this actual study, the Walter Reed study on the PVT scores, if all they took out of that was the sleep and they added it into the software program, sorry, why is this doing that? I'm sorry, this is a slightly different version of the slide. Basically, the software program tracks all of these things identically, captures 98% of the data. It's incredibly accurate. So we know exactly when people sleep. We can tell exactly how they're going to perform anywhere on here. There have also been some other interesting studies done over the years in Australia and the US, where what they do is they put groups of people in a room and feed them alcohol and check their blood alcohol levels and test their reaction time with the PVT scores. Then they did the same thing, but instead of giving them alcohol, they just keep them awake for long periods of time. So what you see is if you're awake for 18 and a half hours continuously, you score the same on a PBD test as somebody that's 0.05 alcohol. If you're awake for 21 hours, you score basically the same as somebody that's 0.08 alcohol. There's a lot of differences between being drunk and being tired, but where they intersect is reaction time and your ability to concentrate. As a matter of fact, if you guys drive in New Jersey, it's a criminal offense, punishable up to 10 years in prison to be awake 24 hours and drive. Treated the same as drinking and driving. And there's certainly moves in Congress on other parts of the U.S. to make that, to bring that into their legal structure. Because, you know, the same reason we don't want people to drink and drive is not because we don't like alcohol. It's because it affects their reaction time and their ability to concentrate, which is exactly the same thing as being awake for long periods of time. Not me. So here's what's going on with our society. This is a 4-year study done in the United States, in arguably not necessarily demographics, 18, 19 to 22-year-olds who are in university. And this is their actual measured sleep during those 4-year studies. And look, and you can see where we're saying, look, you guys, you need 8 or 9 hours or 10 hours of sleep to perform properly. How many of those percentage of students, there's like less than 5% of the entire population are getting the kinds of sleep that they need to perform. This is again a follow-up study from 2004 done by the U.S. military. And what's fascinating about this is this was done at the Great Lakes Naval Academy. Everything they do in the naval academies and like West Point and other places is regimented. When you eat, when you sleep, when you march, when you study, everything's regimented. And historically in those organizations, they've given their cadets 6 hours of sleep. Halfway through the academic year, they take standardized academic tests. And so what you're looking at here in 2000 is the range of standardized academic scores with 6 hours of sleep, range of standardized academic scores with 6 hours of sleep in 2001. 2002 is a transition year, and in 2003, you're looking at the range of test scores with 8 hours of sleep. It's not only statistically significant, the lowest scores with 8 hours of sleep were higher than most of the higher scores they've ever had in that institution. They completely changed how they do things in the U.S. military academies now because of that. This is a difference on average of an 11% difference in your grades. The difference of your body to be able to retain information from 6 to 8 hours is phenomenal. So you pay a lot of different prices for not getting the sleep you get. It's not just you could fall asleep behind the wheel. It's not just you're drowsy. There are huge health and mental effects. I'll show you a couple here. And if any of you guys are interested in any of the actual research on this, our booth over here, people will take your card or your name and address and email, and we'll send you the original research, anything you're interested in here. There's great increases of cardiovascular disease. Low sleep hours is associated with increases of up to 50% in diabetes rates. And in fact, there's lots of great studies out to show if you're a diabetic and you're a poor sleeper, you're having a really hard time controlling your insulin. Increased weight gain and obesity. People who do not sleep at least 8 hours a night have a hard time, really hard time losing weight. And it's not just because they're awake longer, the refrigerator doors open more often. It's a lot more complicated than that. It's because we're diurnal animals. We're supposed to be sleeping at night. And our biological systems need to be repaired, and we need to get that kind of sleep. And when you cheat on that, you pay a price for it. There are lots of people, certainly in the mining industry we work with, and they've been fighting with obesity within their population for a long time, and without a lot of great success. And one of the reasons is that a lot of them have sleep problems, and so you need to fix those kinds of problems before you can get a really great advantage of some of the other programs. You become way more dependent on caffeine if you're not sleeping. We talked about the memory loss. There's increases of deaths from all causes, heart attack, stroke. I mean, quite frankly, the health side of being sleep deprived is probably bigger than the safety side. So talk a little bit about safety here. This is a car crash. If you don't recognize this person, this is Erica. She's going to be in our booth over here. Erica, in December, I believe, was it? Yeah. December, she runs ultra-regular, competes in triathlons globally. And she was in Thailand and coming back, and she got into a taxi cab. And she, about 11 o'clock at night, and she asked the taxi driver, "Are you feeling okay?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm feeling fine." 20 minutes later, he fell asleep. Crashed a car on the freeway. They pulled her out of a burning car. She's lucky she's alive. But that's what's so insidious about fatigue is 1 minute you think you're doing perfectly fine, the next minute your head's bobbing and you're crashing. So what happened with that software program I told you about, that safety program that the U.S. military put together? The U.S. Department of Transportation took that and looked at the railroad industry. And they looked at 1 million work rosters. They looked at over 1,500 fatigue-related and 1,500 non-fatigue-related accidents. And what they did was to be able to correlate scores, PVT scores, with accident risk. And what they found, and sort of the lighting here, the color is a bit off, but basically what they found was when you drop off 30% of your reaction time, which is at 70% on that score, that you're at a statistically significant increased accident risk. And a score of 70, not coincidentally, is the same score you get basically when you're at 0.08 alcohol. So we see accident risks as high as 65%. So if people are dropping the reaction time by 50%, people are getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep, you're at a 65% increased accident risk. So using the same technology with sports teams, particularly teams like the Canucks and our national soccer team and other programs we work with, the key for them is not 70%, the key for them is 90%. Ice hockey's such a very fast game. You drop 10% in reaction time, you have a very, very hard time competing with other teams that aren't tired. And it shows up. There's a little, I don't know if you've seen it before, Hockey Night in Canada did a whole program on this a couple of years ago, and it's clipped over here showing this, the difference between a sleep-deprived Canuck team and a really good Canuck team. It's that much, because that much difference in human performance. So on the safety side, what we say is, look, the U.S. Department of Transportation says, you lose 30% of your reaction time, you're walking disaster. Come back to this. And so it's not a surprise. The other thing that the U.S. Department of Transportation study did was they said, look, fatigue-related accidents follow a circadian pattern. And if you're involved in this business, you kind of go, duh. You're fatigued because you're supposed to be sleeping at night. You're not getting the sleep you're getting. And so it's not a surprise that when you have fatigue-related accidents, they happen when people are supposed to be sleeping. So what you're looking at here is a long-term study with over 75,000 errors over, I think it was a 20-year period in Sweden, where they graphed the errors by time of day. And so what you see is a normal circadian pattern, which is huge increases at night and even a little blip in the afternoon. There's a scientific term for that. They call it a post-lunch dip. So it's that little tiredness you get in the afternoon. It's not because you ate too much pasta. It's part of our natural biology. We're drowsy in the afternoon. That's why a lot of cultures have siestas. They sleep in the afternoon. Some of them get that, some of them don't. So talk to your boss about napping in the afternoon. It's really good. And this is a worldwide international study done by the insurance industry. Looked at 7,000 fatigue-related car crashes and vehicle crashes, and to nobody's surprise, you see exactly that same pattern. Right? And again, even a little blip in the afternoon. So, and the other thing that they discovered in this study, which was actually pretty shocking, was that fatigue-related accidents, not including personal injury, just property damage, fatigue-related accidents cost 5 times more than non-fatigue-related accidents. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if you're driving and a deer jumps up in front of you and you try to evade it, maybe you can mitigate some of the losses. But if you're really drowsy and you're fatigued and you don't react, you're going to have a lot more problems. So why don't people sleep as much as they're supposed to sleep? Aside from the fact that you can stay up and play on the internet and play with your smartphones and watch all the great TV programs that are on. And, it really falls into 3 large categories. One is sleep disorders. Insomnia, which isn't technically a sleep disorder, but it's quite symptomatic. Restless leg syndrome, sleep apnea. So it's a biological sleep program. I know sleep apnea gets a lot of, it's the poster child for sleep disorders, and it gets a lot of attention, but there are 80 other sleep disorders. And certainly with the Ready Band, one of the goals we wanted to do was to be able to screen out people who we can't tell what sleep disorder you have, although I've seen enough of my I can tell you. But we can tell you whether you likely have one or not, and whether your sleep difficulties is self-induced or whether it's caused from a medical condition. There are work-related factors, such as shift work or jet lag. And so there are companies around that design their work, in the South they call it rosters, but work scheduling, so that the workers actually don't have the proper window to sleep. They build in a situation, much like a back-to-back game in the NHL, they build in a situation where the workers cannot get the sleep they need. I'll give you an example here in British Columbia, the firefighters' work schedule. And shockingly, it's actually built into the law in British Columbia. They have to work 2 10-hour days, followed by 2 14-hour nights. And the transition from the second day 10-hour shift to the 14-hour shift gives them the opportunity really to get 3 hours of sleep. Shocking. It was designed 20, 30 years ago. It built into the law in British Columbia. And there are other groups, the mines in Australia we work with. They fly in, often 5-hour commute, to these mines out in the iron ore mines in the middle of nowhere. Then they work 7 12-hour days, then followed immediately by 7 12-hour nights, and a week off. And the way they built that in is the transition between day shift and night shift is horrible. And these guys are very sleep deprived. They've done some really amazing creative things just by having the Ready Band technology and the other technology is to actually look at what's going on in their organization so they can make smart choices. They figured out that the 2 highest fatigue-related areas within your organization was at the end of the very first day shift and at the end of the last night shift. That's where they're having all their accidents. And the reason they were having all their accidents at the end of the first day shift was because these guys are just awake really long. They were like these people on the alcohol study. They're just awake. These guys that have to get up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, drive to an airport, fly 5 hours to get to the mine. So what they did was they said, okay, if you're awake for more, and I think, I forgot it was 13 or 14 hours, you're still working, you're still on our site, but you're not allowed to do any safety sensitive work. You're not operating equipment, you're not doing anything you can hurt yourself. The second, and they eliminated those accidents on that, because that's what was happening. People were just tired and crashing their vehicles. And on the last night shift, what they did was, they said, you know, our productivity is so low on night shift, they actually shut the mine down, put on a skeleton crew at 2 in the morning, and sent the guys home to sleep, back to their huts, wherever they call them dungas, sleep in their huts for 5 hours before they flew them home. And they eliminated accidents on the last shift, lost no productivity. So it's not about changing your work schedules, it's about educating people, it's about having the real knowledge about what's going on in your organization so that you can make smart decisions about the health and safety of your staff. And the last one is really self-imposed factors, which is, of course, students cramming, people have very weird schedules. Particularly we see smartphones, internet, people stay up late, and what happens when you're on those kinds of technologies, is your brain's going a million miles a minute, and then you shut it off and try to get to sleep, and you can't get to sleep. So there's some education around that. That helps. So this is a sort of traditional way we've looked at sleep, which is sort of 7 to 8 hours a night, and that kind of varies during our age. Just a couple of things I want to mention here, and that is adolescence. I'm sure you probably don't have tons of adolescent drivers, but adolescents really are people up to 24, 25 years old. Their brains aren't fully developed. Adolescents have a slightly different natural circadian pattern than adults do. They stay up late at night and they sleep in the morning. That's part of their natural biology. My father used to say to me, "You lazy, I want to get out of bed." No, that's what teenagers do. But we fit them into our society. We get them up early, and because we drop them off to school or their way to work. But that's part of their natural biology. The other thing is adults. And as you get older, we all do, and stuff starts to fall out. And part of what starts to break down is our sleep architecture. So while we still need 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep to function properly, we can only actually get sometimes 5 or 6 hours of sleep in a block. And so my grandfather used to say, "Oh, you can buy with 5 hours of sleep." I go, "Yeah, but you don't count the 3 hours in your rocker in the afternoon, snoozing away." And I know some industries that have actually taken that into account because of the pilots have such a responsible job after they're 60 that they don't want them staying awake for straight 8 hours. They actually give them breaks and even nap breaks. So you need to work around your staff. Sorry, the lighting here is great. I'm just going to mention a little bit about the Ready Gun. I know we've got a few more minutes here, and I know you guys probably have a few questions. All this is just like your iPhone. It's just accelerometers. Just measures motion 16 times a second and data logs it. And we can take weeks and months of data, push a button, download, and goes through an algorithm that converts that into sleep. That's 94% accurate. It goes through that safety model algorithm that turns sleep into fatigue and accident risk data. So when you push the button here, it'll tell you not only about your sleep, but it'll tell you how it affects your life and how it affects your safety, which is really critical if you want to change people's behavior. It's a bit like trying to go into a weight loss program with no weigh scale. This is a weigh scale. This is a way, because my background is in industrial hygiene. So if we want to measure noise, we get out a sound level meter, we go measure noise, and we go, okay, this is too noisy, let's see what we can do to fix it. Let's go back and measure it. Yep, we fixed it. Until this technology came along, we had nothing like this from a health and safety perspective to deal with sleep and fatigue in the organization. And it's really about two things. It's about providing information to the company so that they can make intelligent decisions about their scheduling, intelligent decisions about their staff, and really understand what their accident risk is. That's why the insurance industry loves this stuff. But it's very educational for individual people because it's a shared responsibility. My view is the companies need to arrange their work schedules to give the workers the opportunity to get the right amount of sleep, but it's up to the workers to take advantage of that. It's their life, it's their health. We work with the regulatory agencies in Australia, and Main Roads in Queensland, and Victoria Transport, help them with their technology, help them design some work rest schedules that are built into their regulations. And the discussion is, okay, they need 8 hours, so we'll give them an 8-hour break between this trip and this trip. Well, people have a lot more to do in their lives than jump off the truck and go to sleep and then jump back on the truck again. And you got soccer games, you got to eat, you got to do that. So we're trying to say you need to build in a realistic window where people can actually take advantage of that opportunity. So basically some quick tips here. One is we talked about looking at your work schedules, creating fatigue management policies. Certainly in Australia, it's in fact mandated by law that they have to create fatigue management programs. It's just part of your normal occupational health and safety program. It's one more health and safety risk you have to manage. We have tips for workers, which is actually if you're concerned about your sleep, go get it tested. Like, pay attention to that, and it's not just you necessarily, but there's spouses. One of the things we discovered in the NFL and even in the NHL is sometimes a player may have very poor sleep, not because he or she's a poor sleeper, it's because the roommate has got sleep apnea or some other sleep disorder, or is snoring all night and they can't get the sleep they need. So sometimes it's your spouse, and sometimes it's you. I blame my spouse. So a couple of things here. If you want to look at sort of typical sleep hygiene things you need to do to get better sleep, just go to the best website really is the Mayo Clinic website. Go there, they've got some great tips. It's really good. Telling people how to get good sleep is easy. Actually helping them do it's a whole other thing. So here's a couple of things. You see we have a booth over here. If you put your business card, or if you don't have a business card, give your name and email address to our staff over here, and on, I think it's Monday, I'll get back in the office. We're going to have a draw and give away a free 10 Ready Band trial. Anyone, so you get 10 Ready Bands for your staff or for your 9 other best friends. And we'll provide the sleep and fatigue report and some analysis and just show you how that technology works. If you have any questions, happy to. I think I got a few minutes for questions. 10 minutes for questions? Oh, I should have talked slower. But what you do get out of this is not only the individual report, but we also provide corporate reports. And so confidentiality is actually an issue in some parts of the world. It's not so much in Australia. They seem to have a bit more of an open culture. It's not the same in New Zealand, it's certainly not the same in Asia and China. Here it's a bit more, people are a bit more skittish about the company's health and safety people knowing how you sleep. We understand that. Our platforms are built so that the worker can get their individual report, and what the company gets is a corporate report. So they don't get your report, they don't know when you're up, but they can, what it does is it helps them pinpoint where the risk is in their organization so they can develop strategies around that. So your individual sleep is protected. If that's what you want to do and that's a culture in an organization, we can do that. As I said, the culture in Australia, particularly in mining and some of the other industries, is that they actually have health advisors within their organizations and doctors within their organization. So they know everything, because they're so remote in mines, they have to know everything about your health anyways. They have to know if you're diabetic, they have to know what allergies you have, they have to know all that about you anyways. So that they're a bit more open in terms of that culture, and I think this evolution I talked about to begin with, about how I think fatigue is going to evolve, and I could guess if we're back here 10 years from now or even 5 years from now, I think you're going to be shocked at how much our society is going to change around these kinds of issues. And you'll probably be appalled about some of the practices you probably have today around this issue. As I say, I look back about people smoking in my office and me drinking beer driving my car. Something I'd never do today, but it was accepted part of the culture. And what's accepted part of our culture today is stay awake and put your nose to the grindstone and work as hard as you can, and don't pay that much attention to fatigue. Yep.
Do you have anything to say about how this sleep technology science gets translated into logbook rules?
Into?
Driver's daily logbook rules?
I've talked to Transport Canada. I came from a regulatory background. If you know my background, I was a regulator. In fact, I was in the appeal division for 9 years. Hearing the appeals of all the health and safety plans in the province. My background came as a regulator, and we have this discussion all the time with the regulators we work with, which is you're making assumptions when you create a rule around how long you can drive for, how long you can, what kind of rest periods. You're making assumptions about what the quality and the quantity of sleep people are actually getting during those windows. And what we challenge them to do is, why don't you just take a group of workers who are on those and look at their logbooks and look at their sleep and see whether you've actually created the opportunity for them to get the right sleep. And if they're not, get in and fix that. I've come away from the whole regulatory side personally on the transport side. I think if companies can design their scheduling and the rosters to give the people the right opportunity, and they give them the tools to make sure that sleep gets tested, and then they're not going to be driving fatigued. And there is some, some human flexibility around how that's done. I mean, it's much like you do driver training. You teach them how to drive a truck. You're a competent driver. You send them on the road, but you're at the mercy of their behavior when they're on the road. So so it doesn't matter how many rules you have in place. People will do silly things. Every summer that I can imagine, probably the last 5 or 10 years, there's an article of some family from Alberta driving with a van full of people, leaving 2 o'clock in the morning, driving straight through into British Columbia and crashing at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
Every summer, at least one.
Every summer, right? Coca-Cola everywhere. It's part of, my message really today is part of building that kind of culture within your organization, having that kind of discussion as an associations. How do we move forward with changing our society's behavior around fatigue?
Great, that's it for questions. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can I just real quick? When you talk about, like 8 or 9, 10 hours sleep, and let's say your person will get 6 or 6.5 or 7, whatever it is, if you nap, or you have like an hour nap or a 20-minute nap, does that help?
Yes.
It does.
Yeah, napping is good. Napping is a bit like caffeine. You got to be careful when you do it and how much you take.
Yeah.
Right. Virtually all the Canucks, don't tell a big secret. Virtually all of them nap before games, game day. Napping is a way to fill up your sleep bank. But there's a couple of things about napping. One is you don't want to nap too close to your normal bedtime, because then you're not going to be able to get to sleep, because you've already started to fill up your sleep bank. The other thing about napping is you get what's called sleep inertia. So you get that groggy feeling after you wake up from that. And so actually, for about a half an hour after you wake up from a nap, you're actually worse off in terms of fatigue than you are before you took the nap. So once you get over that half hour through that sleep inertia, then you're better off.
An ideal nap time is half hour, an hour, 2 hours. What's a good nap time?
Well, I can't put the slide back up here, but here's what happens when you start to sleep. We sleep in 1.5 hour cycles. Okay, so we go from being awake all through all the dark, deep stages of sleep back up to REM sleep, and that's an hour and a half. So if you think about it, if you nap for 45 minutes, where are you going to wake up? And wake up in a deep sleep. You're going to get a lot more sleep inertia out of it. So you want to avoid more sleep inertia. I'd say, do 15 or 20 minutes, or do an hour and a half. Running out of time? Kick me out. Good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.